Thank you indeed. We'll continue with the 13th session in this conference titled Using New Technologies to Improve Tax Compliance, Some Success Stories. نستكمل الجلسة الثالثة عشر من جلسات هذا المؤتمر بعنوان تحسين الامتثال الضريبي عن طريق استخدام التقنيات الحديثة قصص النجاح. Please remain seated. We will start the session immediately without a break. Our speakers for this session are Victoria Perry, the Deputy Director, Fiscal Affairs Department, International Monetary Fund; Chris Jordan, Commissioner of Taxation, Australian Taxation Office; Valder Lade, Director General, Estonian Tax and Customs Board; Peter Green, Head of FTA Secretariat, OECD.
Well, welcome to our 13th and final panel, and I too would like to very much thank the organizers and our Saudi hosts for putting together this really impressive conference. I hope we'll be able to keep this very last session a bit lively for you, since we've come to the end of the 2 days. So the purpose of our session, in which we have three very interesting speakers, is to follow up on the last session, led by Jeffrey, to explore some of these concepts in practice. And I think it'll be good because we have the perspective of a large advanced economy, an administration in a small, innovative transition economy, and last but not least, we have a broad overview of the perspective from the Forum on Tax Administration, which includes more than 40 countries. So I think we should have a lively conversation, and in fact, after a couple initial rounds of responses and from our panel, we hope that perhaps we'll be able to have our panelists will have a bit of a conversation with each other, following up on some of the points. As when we were preparing this session over the last couple of weeks, it certainly became apparent that our panelists do have a lot of things to discuss with each other, and I think that would be very interesting. So, to get started, I'd like to direct the first question to Peter. From the broad perspective of the Forum on Tax Administration, what's the overall picture that you're seeing of the use of these technologies, the kind of thing that were being discussed in the previous session? How are things changing, and is there a pattern to where they're changing? Anything like that?
Thanks very much, Vicky, and thanks to the General Authority of Zakat and Tax for the kind invitation and the excellent hospitality we've enjoyed. Maybe a quick word of explanation first. The OECD Forum on Tax Administration brings together 53 advanced and emerging administrations, all of the OECD countries and G20, and works together through a set of time-limited joint projects and a large number of continuing networks covering many areas of tax administration. Its aim is to share knowledge, to collaborate, and to influence the development of global tax administration. As part of our work program, we publish the OECD Tax Administration Comparative Series every 2 years. We recently published the 2019 edition, which is available online. And in that, we've attempted to analyze the general trends that we're seeing in tax administration, as well as highlighting a number of new initiatives taken by FTA members. So summarizing this as regards digitalization, I think what we're essentially seeing is the digitalization of the current system of tax administration, which is largely based on voluntary compliance, supporting voluntary compliance, and tackling areas of non-compliance. And this is happening through three main channels. So first, better e-services and a move to e-administration. So most FTA members are rapidly growing the use of electronic filing, of digital communication channels, mobile applications, digital self-service, and other taxpayer services. Second, we're seeing an increase in the nudging of taxpayer behaviors at appropriate points through the use of increasingly sophisticated data analytics and the embedding of behavioral insights into tax administration thinking. Third, we're seeing sharper risk assessment through the use of large data sets, including cross-border data sets, such as what we're seeing through the OECD Common Reporting Standard, to target verification checks, audits, and enforcement activity. So, digitalization of the current system, while not yet Geoffrey's dream, is still hugely important. There are massive efficiency and effectiveness gains still to be had. For example, there remains a lot of paper in the system. Over 100 million tax returns are filed on paper. There are still significant gaps in on-time filing. Around 20% of reports are filed late in FTA tax administrations. Uncollected, undisputed tax debt still amounts to around 800 billion euros a year. And failure to take reasonable care and errors by taxpayers, arguably quite low-hanging fruit, still accounts for hundreds of billions of euros of lost revenue every year. So it's a rich field to plough. But there's a second, more fundamental game-changing stage that's now starting. And this is a gradual move away from digitalization of the current system to a system which tries to build in compliance. As Italy said in the last session, compliance by design. And this isn't a new concept. Almost all FTA administrations have an aspect of compliance by design in the case of salaried employees, where tax is withheld by the employer and sent to the tax administration. The revenue, therefore, just comes in for a large part of the tax base. Non-compliance is very difficult for the employees. It may sometimes be seen on the side of employers. And burdens are low, or in some countries, fairly non-existent for employees. And as reported in the Tax Administration 2019 publication, we're now seeing elements of compliance by design spread more widely. For example, we've already heard about online cash registers, Russia, Hungary, Korea, and others, and e-invoicing systems, particularly in South America, connected to the administration. And these massive data flows change behaviors, allowing more real-time analysis, more real-time interventions, and in the very near future, they'll offer the prospect of more built-in tax collection at the time of the taxable transaction. We're seeing a growing number of tax administrations using data from third parties, for example, to register taxpayers automatically at certain points in their life, including in some countries at birth, and to partially or indeed often fully pre-fill tax returns, France, Mexico, the Nordic countries, and others. In addition to the flow of data into tax administrations, we're also seeing some tax administrations now working with developers to embed the tax rules into business accounting software. And when that gets combined with trusted inputs, such as blockchain and smart contracts that Geoffrey was mentioning, or third-party verification, then that will move us to compliance by design. So in closing, in these opening remarks, a lot of our focus in the FTA is really on this transition to a seamless and ideally frictionless tax administration. And this includes how best to use the new technology tools within tax administrations during this transition, which still remains the day job. The potential impacts of this transformation are huge. FTA members collect together around 11.5 trillion euros a year. A 1% increase in compliance more than covers the cost of global tax administration.
Thanks, Peter. I think that was a great introduction to set the stage for the rest of our discussions here. And just following up on that, Valdor, against that background, what have been the recent experiences of Estonia in technology and digital advance in your revenue administration? Does some of the things that Peter was saying and what we heard in the previous panel ring true for you? Because I know you were in a position that allowed you to kind of leapfrog some earlier stages and some of the older tax administrations.
Thank you, Vicky. First of all, to start, just wanted to thank from my side also the Zakatan Tax Authority for the excellent event and organization and the opportunity to be here. So yes, to put things slightly into perspective, Estonia has had the advantage as a relatively newly regained independent country to utilize since mid-90s actually the latest technology available at that time, starting the development of the digital e-Estonia, how we like to call it, basically from the scratch. And as was mentioned already in previous panel, I think what is important that the tax authority does not work in vacuum. So basically the whole holistic governmental effort towards transparency and efficiency and digitalization in the country has been behind that. So basically the secure digital ID infrastructure that is available not just for tax purposes and services, but for all citizens and companies within the country, for all the government services and also the private services, has been the great enabler for that sort of digital services build-up. And where that has led, of course, is a greater efficiency, but not only for the public sector, but also then for the citizens and businesses. Based on our estimations, more than 99% of the declarations or any type of tax returns, both from private individuals and businesses in Estonia, are delivered through electronic channels, which basically gives us a great transparency around the data that is available for us. And this transparency, together with the simple and convenient services, has also enabled us sort of to gradually build up the one thing that was also, I think, importantly mentioned in the previous panel, the trustworthiness of the tax authority. Basically, we have the quarterly survey of the trustworthiness of public institutions, and tax authority stands fourth there with 81% of government citizens basically saying that the trustworthiness of tax authority in Estonia is high or very high. But so if we work into the concrete examples that come also from the background mentioned by Peter, is that for example, if we talk about personal income tax returns, then they are pre-filled. The tax return to the citizen is delivered within 3 working days, or at least in the worst cases within 2 weeks of delivering the declaration. And also the VAT return for more than 98% of cases is delivered within 3 days of the VAT declaration deadline. So these are sort of the incremental outputs that you can see that increase the efficiency both for the companies and for the citizens themselves. So if we talk about some of the more recent sort of developments and transformations, then I would definitely say that our approach, given that we already have quite well, I would say quite well-established digital infrastructure in Estonia, then we do not see actually a need for any sort of radical transformation, but more an evolutionary type of approach, where we add and improve service by service, the sort of the service design, the usability, and add new options that would enable businesses and citizens to, as Paolo mentioned, comply by design to these tax obligations that government or EU regulation puts in place. So I think if we continue from here, then we could have later discussion around the specific applications of these services as well.
Great, thanks. So Chris, what about Australia? It's a quite different country, and I think you probably have a longer, well, you do have a longer history with the Revenue Administration in Australia. Maybe looking at recent transformations, but maybe even looking back a bit at the evolution of the technological transformations in Australia. What problems were you trying to solve? Has there been an impact on compliance based on the things you've done? And what are some sort of more recent advances?
Yeah, thank you very much, Vicky. And I do want to take a slightly different track here and do go back in history a little bit, because I think people hear about all these robotic process automations, our data analytics, artificial intelligence, right. And everyone thinks, I want a bit of that. That sounds pretty good. Everyone else is doing that, so give it to me. Right. In fact, that's a way to spend a lot of money on consultants and to waste a lot of money and actually not to really advance what you're doing too much. So I very firmly am of the view, and Tony mentioned this early, that it's really about the people in your organisation and the culture of the organisation that you need to focus on extremely strongly before you really go about investing too much in any form of new technology. Because in Australia, like a lot of other tax authorities, over the years you've built up a lot of processes internally. You've had reviews, things have gone wrong, you've had to put in more checklists, more layers of checking, and so you've built up an extraordinary amount of clutter, that I call it, overly bureaucratic processes. So in Australia, we went through an enormous decluttering process where we literally got rid of tens of thousands of pages, whether mostly physical pages, some electronic, where we basically got rid of those, because how were you going to expect your people to embrace new technology and to be able to work with taxpayers in an empathetic, modern, efficient way if they themselves were totally bound up in process? And they couldn't do anything without filling out a 20-page checklist. So I think it's very important to have a look at your existing process and systems, get rid of most of them, or certainly revamp them into a shorter, modern, sharper sort of guidance. There's literally tens of thousands of pages of guidance and instructions we just got rid of, that had just been built up. And people, the staff were so happy. They were mindlessly ticking off, checklists and approvals and signing things because of a build-up of layer after layer of process. So I think then, after having decluttered, you've got to really look at what are you trying to achieve. Now, in our case, we were trying to be a much more client service focused culture. We wanted to put the client at the centre of everything we were doing. We wanted to put ourselves in the shoes of our clients, our taxpayers, whether they're individuals or businesses. Because what had happened in the past, we had developed a whole lot of new technology or ways of doing things that took a long time, cost a lot of money, and was generally very difficult and over-engineered, and then told people, this is what you must use. And people said, we don't want that. That doesn't fit into our systems. We would have to create a system to plug into that thing that you want us to use. So by putting yourselves in the shoes of the clients and tapping into natural systems, it is then very important to understand not to overlay any additional requirements onto clients. So I think the decluttering the process, to understand that you are a service organisation there to help people navigate themselves through a very complex system called taxation, and you're there with a staff that you want to be able to free up and to deal with people in a way that they would like to be dealt with in themselves. So fundamentally, it was about really how do you make interactions with the tax office, the tax authority, infrequent, quick and painless. It's sort of like going to your dentist. You never really want to do it, but you know at some point in time you have to. So what do you want? You want those visits to be infrequent, quick and painless. And I think that process of service to taxpayers is fundamentally what we're doing. So then you can start to think about how can I provide the best service to our clients? How can I have our staff embrace that and use it to its maximum extent? So things like easy filing that we heard about and pre-filling. So what we did is we developed a voice authentication system, and we've got over 8 million voice prints. I have on my smart device the ATO app. I can say into that, in Australia, my voice identifies me. I can go straight into my tax account and I can transact. I can lodge returns, I can change my details, I can vary instalments, I can do all of that. So you can then go into your tax return, and most of the fields there are already pre-filled. All your income side, medical expenses, your partner's address, all the detail that you need to know is put there, from interest, banks, dividends, from companies, employers, all pre-filled, and all you have to do is put in some deductions in this app. It's called My Deductions. So then you take a photo of the receipts and you describe what it is, and it automatically uploads into your tax return at the end of the year. So you don't need to keep paper receipts, you've got the photo and it automatically goes into the return. Now, you go, well, what's that got to do with technology? That's just an app, so what? But then we developed what we call nearest neighbour. So when you're filling in those deductions in a return that's presented to you, filled out other than for whatever deductions, let's say you're a construction engineer, you're earning $300,000 a year, and you put in a claim for an item. Immediately there'll be a pop-up that says, do you really want to claim that amount for that item? Because that is in excess of anyone else that's earning your income in your occupation in the area in which you live. We can get it down very quickly. Mostly people reduce it. And that then saves us having to write a letter, because we say, if you put that amount in, we will query it. So that saves a whole lot of hassle for the client having to respond, us having to write, etc. So that's a great example of using technology. When we started to do the nearest neighbour, it took 2 weeks to actually run the process over all of our data. Then we got it down to a couple of hours, a couple of minutes, and then instantaneous. So there's a way of doing really easy processing and being able to have a compliance benefit as well as an aid for people. We heard about, from the UK, robotic process automation. And how do you help your people? Staff do not like sitting there doing the same thing repetitively over and over again each day, knowing they're really not adding much value. So when I say we put the client in the centre of everything we do, you also need to understand the staff and our culture are fundamental to the success of our operations. So then you look for any manual, labour-intensive, repetitive function that you perform. Then you can get the non-robot, as was said, but you can use the robotic process automation to do that. And one example we did is data matching. We get feeds from banks and companies and all employers, and what they put in the return is different. So you had someone looking at the differences, sending out a letter, looking at the reply, working out what to do. By using those processes, the robotic process automation, it can generate the letter, and that's great. That sounds pretty simple. But it can then interpret the response and say, well, this looks like a correct response. Oh, sorry, I forgot about that interest. You knew about it, I didn't. Can you please deal with that? And then you automatically do something. So that takes away an enormous amount of people hours in our workforce that was not adding any value at all, and you can use those resources elsewhere. And I'll finish up in a moment because I love this one, the lifestyle analytics. Because often people either in the hidden economy or small businesses, they're not disclosing all their income. So how can you match up excessive lifestyle expenditure to income reported from a business? And we've developed some techniques that do that very well, and you combine that with the ability to scrape publicly available information on Facebook and things like that. One example, a business person, it was a fairly substantive business, but they were returning about $80,000 for the husband, about $60,000 for the wife. They were thinking, well, that's enough to keep us under the radar. But the fact is they had 3 kids in private schools, and in Australia that's about $20,000 each, so that's 60. They'd been overseas business class 3 times in the last 2 years. They lived in a house that was worth X amount, that the insurance was this, the rates were that, etc. You pull all that information, and when you present it to them, the first question this person said, how did you know we went overseas? So they couldn't dispute any of it. They knew every single item. We knew the private schools because the kids' Facebook pages. We knew they'd been overseas, and we also get information from the immigration department. It is indisputable. They cannot dispute that. Because in the old days you said, well, you've got all these things, but we don't know how you got them. But now we can identify precisely. And I tell you, normal citizens hate people that do that. They're not living in the mansion. They're not going overseas business class 3 times in 2 years. They've not got the kids in private schools. And so they love to think that they've got the trust in us and the confidence in us that we're making it easy for people to comply and hard for people not to. And that notion of trust and confidence is so important. We hear it all the time. And that's just a little example of using some basic data analytics, some basic scraping tools to be able to match lifestyle expenditure with reported income on a much, much more precise basis. Now, I've got a bunch of other examples, but I think I've spoken enough, Vicky.
Thanks. No, that was terrific, Chris. And so I guess the main lesson is be very careful what you let your kids put on their Facebook pages.
That's one of them.
Yes. Gee, what everybody said here, I think, just raises a host of things we might want to follow up on. But just to work backward, Peter Valdur, what reactions did you have to this last bit that Peter talked about? But before that, I just want to emphasize, I think one of the first things Chris talked about leads into the all-important notion of figure out what it is that you need to use the data, use the technology and the data for, and what it is you're going to transform. All too often, at least in our work with many, many countries, we've seen it's very dangerous to sort of think that computers will solve the problem, bring in the computer guys, so to speak, and have them create something very elaborate, which either simply picks up on what Chris was saying, the clutter you already have.
There's no point simply digitizing a bad process.
Right. Or worse, they create the processes, but unless they're guided very carefully by the tax administrator, the people who actually understand the tax administration, you can wind up with yet a different system that isn't actually fit for purpose either. At least that's been our experience. But I wonder if, yeah, Peter and Valdor, you could react to this last lifestyle data scraping comment by Chris.
Yeah, if I may build up on that, I think the thinking of tax authorities around the globe seems to be fairly similar. The tools and ways how to achieve that might differ, but for example, in our case, as there is this countrywide principle that all the data that the citizens or businesses have given to the government is available for all the other sort of entities in the country, so nobody needs to give in any data twice within the country. So all the databases between the different entities are interconnected. And so based on that actually, and based on our own, of course, risk models and analytics, what you do is maybe not as forceful as Chris described here, but what we will have live and launched is basically both for the private persons and for the businesses, the risk scoring. So based on their tax returns, based on the analytics, based on the social networks that we have been capable of establishing, we will make digitally available their risk scoring, which basically means that which basically equals the probability that the tax authority will audit them. And on top of that, of course, we give the person or the company a few suggestions. What are the sort of biggest risks or biggest problems that they currently see within the business? So that also has this sort of efficiency side of it. So either the companies or private persons, they correct themselves, these sort of differences or gaps, or they know that the tax authority will approach them. So this is how you can actually sort of utilize the data analytics, not only for your own control purposes, but also to leverage back on the front that the companies themselves will react on that, and you don't actually need to get actively involved with the high-cost personal resources around that. So,
Peter, just maybe if you could also, maybe referring back to what Jeffrey said rather succinctly, which was, or Jeffrey's panel, that going beyond confirmation of filing of things or provision of information, the next frontier is simply basically plugging the tax administration into business accounts. Would you agree with that? And how are people reacting to that? How do taxpayers react to that?
Yeah, very, very much agree with that. And I think we're seeing examples, as we've set out in the tax administration series, of people already doing that, in particular with small businesses. And we heard from Anthony about how the UK are opening up their systems to allow software developers to build them into business accounts. And that's something that's very welcome, I think, by the large majority of taxpayers. If you can work with the grain of what they use, then they'll come along with you. Maybe to pick up on 2 points that Chris made. One is on the kind of what you're doing, the digital strategy. And I think what he said underscores the need to have short-term, medium-term, and long-term digital strategy to understand what you're doing, why you're doing it, and what you want to do. And that involves a conversation within the administration, but also with stakeholders, in particular taxpayers, but also finance ministries and others, about where you're going with the tax administration. It's very easy to get on the wrong train, to put lots of money into services which maybe don't really deliver the outcomes that are needed, and maybe missing opportunities to build in compliance. The other issue, picking up on this lifestyle system that they have, very effective, very interesting. I think it also raises the issue of data protection and constraints of data, which was mentioned by Valerio in the last panel as one of the major constraints they're seeing. And I experienced this when in my previous job in the UK Treasury, I used to go off and negotiate for exchange of information. And a separate set of people from other ministries will go off and negotiate data protection. And the two parts of government didn't really talk to each other. And I think we're at a point now where the world has moved on to an extent where there does need to be a serious and in-depth public debate about the use of data to improve citizens' lives and the trade-offs that exist with some of the risks. In particular, the risks of Pascal emphasized yesterday about data confidentiality, data leakage, and the risk of undermining the potential gains from that.
Yes.
If I could just quickly add in there, because what in effect I was saying in the prior panel is, how do you tap into the natural systems of businesses or people? We have a natural system for employees where the employer pays them, and we have now introduced single touch payroll where every payday we get reported instead of at the end of the year by the employer who they paid and with an identifier, a tax file number, and how much tax they should withhold. So that's a natural system. We are not requiring them to do anything more than they otherwise wanted to. We had our Social Security Department ask, well, instead of doing it on their payday, can you ask them also to report their last 10 days rolling pay, because that's what they use to measure qualifications for welfare recipients. And we said, absolutely not, because that's not a natural system. The bank account, small business, tradesperson, if we have confidence because of their risk rating that they've complied, why wouldn't we, with their permission, just take the deposits into the account as income and the withdrawals as deductions? And we've introduced a $50,000 up to deduction for capital expenditure for small businesses with a turnover under $10 million. Not many small businesses spend more than $50,000 at a time. Well, there is their tax reporting. It's sitting in their bank account. So we could do their quarterly instalments, we could do a draft tax return, they could take it to their accountant at the end of the year and say, look, I think this is all okay, and everything's deductible, and the accountant says yes, and off we go. So that's another natural system.
Great.
So this is all about how do we tap into that.
So if I may, as a last comment, I think the best way for the design by compliance is the way to get rid of the tax returns and have this sort of database interfaces where nobody needs to sort of report anything, but all the data is available for the analysis.
Thanks. Okay, I think our time is just about up, but maybe the lightning round, 2 last sentences from each panelist. I think Valdor just gave his. And Peter, any very last thought?
Well, I guess every tax administration broadly faces the same challenges and the same risks. So I think coming out of this conference, I would stress the importance of sharing knowledge, of collaboration, working together, and not reinventing the wheel.
Thanks.
And if I may, one comment,
certainly.
then do only things that you understand through digital transformation. If somebody sort of tries to consult in something that you really don't understand, then give it a really deep thought or say no.
That is very good advice, not just in tax administration, I think.
Well,
And
that covers off.
Chris.
I was going to say, do bite-sized things first. Prove to yourselves, I meant to mention, sometimes as an authority, you're a bit uncertain about how well you can do things in this new age. So try to do some things well that are a bite-sized thing that you actually prove to yourselves, to your staff, that you are capable of doing something modern, cutting edge and worthwhile before you take a big leap forward, and think through clearly, what am I trying to achieve by the use of this technology, and have I got my processes right before I go anywhere near the new technology?
Thanks. So can you join me in thanking our panelists for, I thought, a really interesting set of observations.
Thank you indeed, our valued speakers. And now, ladies and gentlemen, with the closing remarks from His Excellency, Governor of GAZT. والآن أيها السيدات والسادة الكرام، ننتقل بكم إلى الكلمة الختامية من معالي محافظ الهيئة العامة للزكاة والدخل، المهندس هيل بن محمد أبانمي.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السيدات والسادة، أسعد الله مساءكم بكل خير. لقد تشرفت الهيئة العامة للزكاة والدخل باستضافة هذا المؤتمر الذي جمع شخصيات بارزة من المنظمات الدولية وقطاع الأعمال والقطاع الحكومي والأوساط الأكاديمية. وقد ناقش المشاركون في المؤتمر التحديات والفرص التي تنشأ عن السياسات الضريبية الجديدة في ظل التغيرات المتسارعة التي تشهدها بيئة الأعمال، ومناقشة مواضيع الزكاة وكيفية احتسابها وعلاقتها بضريبة الدخل الشركات والمعايير المحاسبية. ويطيب لي أن أتقدم ببالغ الشكر لكل رؤساء الجلسات والمتحدثين والمشاركين وجميع من ساهم في التجهيز والإعداد لهذا المؤتمر والجهات الحكومية، وكذلك شركات القطاع الخاص المشاركة في المعرض المصاحب لهذا المؤتمر. وأتمنى أن تكون ورش العمل التي حضرها أكثر من 1000 مستفيد خلال يومين كانت ذات قيمة علمية عالية لهم. لقد تحدثنا في هذا المؤتمر عن آخر مستجدات المتطلبات الضريبية لمجموعة ال20، فبالرغم من أن العديد من الهيئات العالمية تساهم في الإصلاح الضريبي العالمي، فقد لعبت مجموعة ال20 دوراً هاماً بشكل خاص في قيادة الجهود لتحقيق قدر أكبر من اليقين والوضوح الضريبي على مدار العقد الماضي، وكيفية تصميم بيئة ضريبية مشجعة على الاستثمار والنمو، ودور الضرائب في تعزيز التنمية والحاجة إلى بناء القدرات. لقد شمل الحديث في مؤتمرنا التحديات الضريبية في التحول إلى الاقتصاد الرقمي، فكان في هذا المؤتمر 3 جلسات لهذا الموضوع الحيوي نوقش بها مقترحات إحداث تغيير جذري في النظام الضريبي الدولي الحالي في ظل النقاش العالمي الدائر حالياً. وناقش نخبة من الخبراء والمختصين الأثر المحتمل للمضي قدماً في تنفيذ الركيزتين الأولى والثانية والمندرجتين تحت الحل المقترح حالياً، بما في ذلك الأثر على الإيرادات والاستثمار. لقد استعرضنا أيضاً التجارب الناجحة لتطبيق ضريبة القيمة المضافة وضريبة السلع الانتقائية في دول مجلس التعاون الخليجي، والخطوات القادمة لرفع مستوى الخدمات المقدمة للمكلفين بالاعتماد على أفضل الممارسات العالمية. ولما تمثله الزكاة وضريبة الدخل على الشركات من أهمية كبيرة، فقد كان هناك نقاش حيوي حول الطرق المختلفة لاحتساب الزكاة ومزايا كل طريقة وسلبياتها، وطريقة أيضاً احتساب الزكاة التي اختارتها المملكة وارتباط الزكاة بضرائب دخل الشركات. إن التناغم بين القطاعات المالية يعني ممارسات عملية أفضل، ففي هذا المؤتمر تم مناقشة التفاعل بين القطاعات المختلفة داخل القطاع المالي الحكومي، واتفق المتحدثون المشاركون على وجود قدر عالي من التعاون والتكامل بين تلك القطاعات المختلفة، نتج عنه توحيد لغة الرسائل التي يرسلها كل قطاع من هذه القطاعات الحكومية إلى القطاع الخاص لإيجاد تعاون أوثق في مكافحة جميع أشكال الجرائم المالية بما في ذلك الجرائم الضريبية. أظهرت النقاشات ووجود توافق على أن فرض ضرائب على استهلاك السلع والخدمات الرقمية المقدمة إلكترونياً وتطوير أنظمة ضريبة القيمة المضافة للتجارة الإلكترونية عبر الحدود أنها توفر بيئة متساوية بين التجارة الإلكترونية وغير الإلكترونية، إضافة إلى توفيرها مصدر دخل جديد. كما تم مناقشة مواجهة الدول النامية لمطالب جديدة على نظم إدارة الضرائب لديها، مثل التركيز على قضايا الضرائب الدولية ومتطلبات مشروع مكافحة تآكل الوعاء الضريبي وتحويل الأرباح، والمتطلبات المحلية لتمكين تبادل البيانات على نطاق واسع. ولما للذكاء الاصطناعي وتحليل البيانات من قدرة على إحداث تحولات جذرية في إدارة الضرائب على المدى البعيد، فقد أنهينا المؤتمر بجلستين لدراسة كيف أن لتقدم التكنولوجي والتطورات السريعة في نماذج الأعمال التجارية في جميع القطاعات، سواء في الاقتصاد الرقمي أو الذي أدخلت عليه التقنيات الرقمية، تشكل تحدياً للطرق التقليدية لفرض الضريبة. كما أن تقنية سلسلة الكتل الموزعة أو ما يعرف بالبلوك تشين والتقنيات المالية والحوسبة السحابية والذكاء الاصطناعي وغيرها من التقنيات الحديثة تؤدي إلى إرباك الأساليب التقليدية للعمليات والأعمال وسلاسل القيمة العالمية. وقد حدد المشاركون إمكانية إحداث تحول جوهري في إدارة الضرائب لزيادة الفرص المحتملة وتقليل المخاطر المصاحبة للرقمنة. ولله الحمد، فقد حقق هذا المؤتمر نجاحاً كبيراً بحضور قادة القطاع المالي والاقتصادي في دول المنطقة والعالم، حيث تجاوز عدد الحضور في المؤتمر على مدار يومين أكثر من 3500 شخص تواجدوا في الجلسات والمعرض المصاحب وورش العمل المتخصصة، وأكثر من 10,000 شخص من المتخصصين والمهتمين بالمواضيع التي تم طرحها في المؤتمر حضروا النقاشات عبر البث المباشر من خلال عدة قنوات رقمية. ختاماً، أتقدم لكم بالشكر الجزيل على حضوركم وإثرائكم للمؤتمر في دورته الأولى، وسنستمر في دعم هذا القطاع من خلال عقد مؤتمرات وندوات وورش عمل مشابهة، بما يضمن تحقيق التطور والنمو والازدهار الذي تصبو إليه حكومة سيدي خادم الحرمين الشريفين وولي عهده الأمين، وبما يتوافق مع رؤية المملكة 2030. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
شكرا جزيلا معالي المحافظ. بهذا أيها السيدات والسادة الكرام نأتي لختام أعمال هذا المؤتمر. شكرا جزيلا لكم، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Thank you indeed, ladies and gentlemen. With this, we come to the end of our conference. We look forward to seeing you in other events. Thank you very much.